Major breaking news. We've got some big things going on, guys. From True Life News Channel, we've got a ton of information for you right here in this video. We want to show you guys exactly what is going on. There's been a lot of things happening, a lot of things taking place, guys, and there's a lot of controversy right now. Things have intensified. Things have gotten a lot worse, and we're getting ready to show you guys exactly kind of what's going on.
Good morning. Well, thank you so much for having me. That's exactly what this is. This is anarchy. This is absolute unrest, and it's absolutely unacceptable. You have a group of overly emotional and underly informed individuals that are picking and choosing what laws they will abide by in the name of social protest, and it's absolutely ludicrous. You have a group of students that have now taken over a building, and there have been reports overnight of faculty members that were inside the building that were briefly even held hostage. This is going to continue to escalate and get worse and worse and worse until, God forbid, someone gets hurt. It is the time now for strong, decisive leadership. You see schools around the country where some leaders are stepping forward and stopping this anarchy from happening. In the name of social protest, these students have believed that they are not accountable for their actions. And that is actually pinpointed by the spiraling decline now in society, where criminals are not held accountable by their actions, accountable for their actions, rather. We need to take a hard stand and end this now before it gets worse.
And to that point that you just made, as a police officer, give us a lesson on law and order, of controlling mobs, of negotiating with individuals like this. How would you have put a swift end to this before scenes like this could even think about happening?
So this is beyond negotiations at this point. As a New York City police officer, I retired as an inspector of the 70th Police Precinct. We dealt with a lot of protests throughout my 25-year tenure. Social protest, abiding by the laws, is one thing, but once it crosses the line into criminal behavior, once you are stopping emergency vehicles from getting to where they need to be, once you are taking over schools, once you are not allowing students based on their Jewish faith to cross into buildings and cross over lines, you have gone into the criminal element of this, and it has to be dealt with. They have to be held accountable for their actions. The students are demanding amnesty for all the laws that they're breaking. That is absolutely unacceptable. This needs to be shut down. The leaders must be taken into custody and charged appropriately. Those who have been wielding hammers and breaking windows, destroying properties, holding people hostage. I saw the reports of a Jewish student or a Jewish individual being tased yesterday on one of the campuses. It's time for quick, decisive, strong leadership. The students must be held accountable for their actions. If there are professional agitators there, they must be held accountable for their actions. All crimes must be prosecuted. And the NYPD or the National Guard, the NYPD is some of the best in the business. They are going to go in. They will make the arrests that they need to with the professionalism that we demand. There will not be incidents escalated by the police department, but the students need to understand that if you do the crime, you're going to be held accountable. And leadership, both in the government and leadership in these colleges, needs to step forward and hold these students accountable.
You said National Guard. Do we need to see the National Guard today, basically when the sun comes up, if you can mobilize them that quickly?
We don't need the National Guard in New York City. The NYPD is ready and capable of handling protests such as this, handling mob crimes such as this. They are absolutely capable of going in there and ending this today. With Occupy Wall Street, we did it with the protests, the mostly peaceful protests, aka riots of 2020. The NYPD is more than capable of handling this. They need to be allowed to do their job.
I asked you what you would do if you were in charge as a police officer, as someone in law enforcement. You're running for Congress. Now I'm going to ask you what you would do if you get to the hallowed halls of Congress. What will you do to put a stop to this?
Well, listen, I'm a law and order candidate, and government's number one job is to keep their people safe, and they're failing to do that. I'm running for United States Congress because we are seeing a decline of law and order in this country. And it's not rocket science. It's 101. We need to be holding criminals accountable for their actions. You know, it's like cutting the head off a snake. The rest of the snake will wither. If you take the leaders of this protest into custody, normalcy will resume. It has to be decisive leadership, strong leadership that's coming out of Albany, that's coming out of Washington, and that's coming out of the hallowed halls of the academia.
You mentioned the word consequences. There need to be consequences for our actions in life, no matter whether it's this scene, whether you're dealing with a child who's 1 year old, you try to teach them right from wrong. But these protesters, this to me is the wildest part of the story. They are not only demanding all that they are demanding with regard to Israeli divestment, but they're also demanding amnesty for anything that they do, whether it's breaking the glass like you see on the screen, whether it's preventing people from taking finals, whether it's intimidating their fellow students, many of whom are Jewish. What's your message to, quite frankly, Allison, these children who want no consequences for their actions?
Well, the adults need to take over. The adults in the room need to take over in this situation. Imagine these are the same students that are not going to be allowed to graduate, that went through the pandemic a few years back and didn't have their senior proms or high school graduations. The adults in the room need to take over. You don't have amnesty. You don't get to demand amnesty to crimes in the name of social protest. That's not how this works. The adults need to take over. These students need to understand, maybe for the first time in their lives, that there are consequences to your actions, and you don't get to commit crime just because you're feigning outrage, just because you're upset.
You hear that, guys? Like, they're wanting amnesty just because they feel entitled. But listen to what Speaker Johnson is saying.
Coming out.
This is crazy, guys.
Well, thank you all for being here. We all know what is happening around the country right now, and House Republicans are here to do something about it. Over the last few weeks, we've seen absolute lawlessness and chaos on college and university campuses across America. On Wednesday of last week, I and a handful of my colleagues traveled to Columbia University, which became the epicenter in the last couple of weeks, to meet with Jewish students there and to see the madness that's happening there for ourselves. The anti-Jewish hatred was appalling. And we heard firsthand from students who are living in fear because of the pro-Hamas agitators who have taken over their campus. We met with a large number of Jewish students before we had our press event there and before we met with the university president. And they told us the harrowing tales of what they're having to face. It's not right, and everybody in this country knows it. After I met with President Shafiq, it was clear that she has lost control of her campus and she needs to step down. The first and most obvious responsibility of a university administrator is to ensure the safety and security of their students. If an administrator cannot ensure that, they have missed their first assignment. We need to find people who can do that. Just last night there at Columbia, students barricaded themselves inside one of the academic buildings. They fought with the maintenance crew there. They assaulted students. They broke through windows, destroyed property, hung intifada banners from the building. And the law enforcement was nowhere to be found. We're told that NYPD is outside the perimeter of the campus, but they have not been invited in. And they won't go until they are invited. What are university officials waiting on? What do they need to see before they stand up to the terrorist sympathizers? And that is exactly what they are. What's worse, though, is that Columbia's choice to ignore the safety of their Jewish students and appease anti-Semites has inspired even more hate-filled protests to pop up across the country. And what we're seeing right now is people wave Hezbollah flags and Hamas flags, their homemade signs supporting what happened on October 7th. It's outrageous. Hamas endorsed the protest at Columbia University just about 2 hours before we walked out on the steps to have our press event on Wednesday. They're proudly chanting things like death to America and profanity and hate-filled slogans. And this is utterly despicable, and it cannot be accepted in this country. Anti-Semitism is a virus. And because the administration and woke university presidents aren't stepping in, we're seeing it spread. We have to act. And House Republicans will speak to this fateful moment with moral clarity. We really wish those in the White House would do the same. We will not allow anti-Semitism to thrive on campus, and we will hold these universities accountable for their failure to protect Jewish students on campus. And that's why today we're here to announce a house-wide effort to crack down on anti-Semitism on college campuses. Nearly every committee here has a role to play in these efforts to stop the madness that has ensued. Joining me today are my colleagues in leadership, as well as committee chairs of the committees of appropriate jurisdiction. And we're going to elaborate on what we'll be doing as part of this whole of the House effort. The federal government plays a critical role in higher education, and we will use all the tools available to us to address this scourge. With that, I'll turn it over first to our House Republican Chair, Elise Stefanik, who's been doing extraordinary work on this issue for a number of weeks. Elise, we'll grab that.
Thank you so much to our speaker. I want to thank the speaker as well as Chairwoman Fox for visiting Columbia University's campus last week to highlight moral leadership that is sorely needed and lacking when it comes to these university presidents. I also want to thank the speaker for making this a priority for all of House Republicans. It is clear that Jewish families across this country, Americans across this country, are looking for moral clarity, and we are going to deliver where these higher education institutions have failed. As the speaker said, last night at Columbia, America watched in disgust as President Shafiq allowed an anti-Semitic pro-terrorist mob to storm and seize an academic building, holding faculty inside, flying pro-Hamas signs, and damaging property. Joe Biden, far-left Democrat governors like my home state in New York, and morally bankrupt university leaders have allowed this moral rot of anti-Semitism to fester, refusing to enforce the laws and refusing to ensure the safety of Jewish students. And it's not just Columbia. This is a moral rot that has taken root across American higher education institutions. At Yale University, a Jewish student was stabbed in the eye with a Palestinian flag. At the University of Southern California, graduation was canceled due to the university being unable to guarantee the safety of students. Jewish students were barricaded at the library at Cooper Union. At my alma mater, Harvard University, a Palestinian flag was hoisted at University Hall, where the American flag always flies, in clear violation of university policies. There are dozens of these anti-Semitic encampments across the country. These mobs are breaking university rules, leading to the targeting and harassment of Jewish students and faculty. In December, at a hearing chaired by our Education and Workforce Chairwoman, Virginia Fox, we exposed just how ingrained anti-Semitism has become at America's so-called elite institutions in higher education. When I questioned the presidents of Harvard, MIT, and Penn, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate your university's code of conduct? One after the other said it depends on the context. And the world heard it is now the most viewed congressional testimony in history. 8 days ago, I was the first member of Congress to demand that Columbia President Shafiq resign for her failure to disband the anti-Semitic mob consuming Columbia's campus and her failure to ensure the safety of Columbia's Jewish students. Instead, she negotiated with these self-proclaimed terrorists, allowing their anti-Semitic mob to grow. Enough is enough. It is time to restore law and order, academic integrity, and moral decency to America's higher education institutions. Joe Biden has been deafeningly silent. So I want to thank again the speaker, as well as all of our chairs who will ensure this is a top priority for House Republicans. There can be no moral equivalency. It is time to send a clear message to the world that anti-Semitism has no place in America. The world is indeed watching. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our whip, Tom Emmer.
Thank you, Lisa. Our House Republican Conference is here today to deliver a message to the pro-terrorist anti-Semites taking over our college campuses. We're here to deliver a message to the university administrators who have chosen to be complicit in these movements for hate rather than taking action. And we're here to deliver a message to Hamas, Iran, and members of the squad, including my Minnesota colleague Ilhan Omar, who have all endorsed these anti-Semitic protests that enough is enough. Accountability is here. Our college campuses should never be breeding grounds for anti-Semitism. Yet that is exactly what they have become. Why? Because of university administrators who have refused to protect their Jewish students. Because of faculty members who have enabled the wave of anti-Semitic violence. Because of an administration that has tried to play both sides of this issue. And because of far left members of Congress who are applauding anti-Semitism on college campuses. In other words, it's because we have a bunch of adults in a room who are refusing to be the adults in the room. While no one else is standing up to lead during this pivotal moment in history, House Republicans will. I want to thank Speaker Johnson and our committee chairs for providing much needed accountability on an issue that has been met with a disturbing amount of indifference and even encouragement from the people who are supposed to keep our students safe. The world is watching to see how we respond, and I, for one, am grateful to be part of a conference that will be on the right side of history. And with that, I turn it over to our leader, Steve Scalise.
Thank you, Whip. Since October 7th, when a terrorist organization backed by Iran, known as Hamas, invaded Israel, you have seen a growing wave of anti-Semitism. Obviously, in Israel, we saw a war declared on them. And Israel said, we're going to defend our state. And you saw, by the way, these colleagues here and so many of my House colleagues stand and say, we support Israel's right to defend themselves as a Jewish state. But something else alarming that you started to see happen after that is when we started taking action here. And that is when you started seeing anti-Semitism grow here in the United States, here on college campuses, and in fact, here on the House floor by some of our colleagues on the other side. And we've been speaking out against it vocally. This is an area where you have to learn from the mistakes of history, because if you don't learn from the mistakes of history, we're all doomed to repeat it. Let's not forget what happened in the lead up to World War II. And so when you see some of the things that these, whether you call them terrorist sympathizers, anarchists, they're organized. When they show up and they all have the same kind of tents, when they all are from out of state in many of these places where they're showing up, it's an organized mob trying to ensue chaos and breed anti-Semitism. And if we don't stand up against it every place we see it, and more importantly, if we don't call on those people whose main job is to protect the people that they're tasked with looking over. Look at these college presidents, you know, and we're asking all of our committee chairs to look into the billions of federal taxpayer dollars that go to these universities. And part of the reason that goes to these universities is that so they can provide a good education for their students, so they could provide a safe environment for their students. And if these presidents won't provide that safe environment, then those university presidents need to go. They need to resign. And we've been very vocal about calling on them to step down as well, because they're not only failing their students, but they're disgracing the universities. Many of these universities that have had long and storied reputations that are being tarnished. Many of them permanently. Students and parents that won't even send their kids to these schools anymore because their kids are no longer safe. And we're seeing it play out today on many campuses across the nation. But here in this House, with our majority, we're going to continue to hold these people accountable for the money that they get and for the failures that they're ensuing. If you look at what happened, and Elise touched on it a little earlier, over 1 billion people watched that video that she talked about. Over 1 billion people watched a congressional hearing. I'd like to think there's interest that high in every congressional hearing we have. But America's watching, and even more than that, the world is watching. And so we need to continue to show the moral clarity between right and wrong and call out anti-Semitism and attacks on Jewish people and anybody else for their faith as for what it is, and stand up against the people that are doing it. And leading the charge, the person who had the first hearing in her committee months ago, is the chair of the Education and Workforce Committee, Somebody's tough going after the people that are doing all of this. Virginia Fox.
Thanks, Steve. I want to thank the speaker also for making this an all of the House issue. It is an all of the House issue. It's an issue for our country. As Republican leaders, we have a clear message for mealy-mouthed, spineless college leaders. Congress will not tolerate your dereliction of duty to your Jewish students. American universities are officially put on notice that we have come to take our universities back. I applaud the speaker for expanding the Committee on Education and Workforce's ongoing investigation into a Congress-wide initiative. No stone must go unturned while buildings are being defaced, campus greens are being captured, or graduations are being ruined. College is not a park for play-acting juveniles or a battleground for radical activists. Everyone affiliated with these universities will receive a healthy dose of reality. Actions have consequences. One of those consequences is that I have given notice to appear to Yale, UCLA, and Michigan to appear before the Education and Workforce Committee on May 23rd for a hearing on their handling of these most recent outrages. I look forward to working with my fellow House leaders on additional action to address these riots, and I yield to Frank Lucas.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And thank you, Speaker Johnson, for taking action on this important issue. Right now, Jewish students facing harassment, discrimination, and in some case violence at our colleges and universities. This anti-Semitism is unacceptable, and it goes against who we are as Americans. We entrust our colleges and universities with conducting scientific research and educating the next generation of leaders and innovators. They can't do that when students are being driven off of campus by shocking displays of anti-Semitism. What's more, universities that can't protect their students are not in compliance with their funding obligations through the National Science Foundation. Funding through NSF accounts for about 25% of all federal support to America's college and universities for basic research. As a part of the conditions of receiving taxpayer dollars through the NSF, universities must comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin. Schools like Columbia and UC Berkeley annually receive more than $50 million each in NSF grants. It's time we review whether universities that allow the harassment, assault, or intimidation of their Jewish students are in compliance with their federal obligations. We'll be looking to conduct oversight on this issue very soon. Thank you for your time here today, and I now turn to my colleague, Chairwoman Kathy McMorris Rodgers.
I echo my colleagues' words. I appreciate the leadership of Speaker Mike Johnson in bringing us together. We must do everything that we can to ensure the safety and well-being of all students, faculty, and staff, including those of Jewish heritage and faith. With broad jurisdiction over energy and public health, the Energy and Commerce Committee oversees agencies that dole out massive amounts of taxpayer-funded research grants. For example, in fiscal year 2023, the National Institutes of Health have given around $682 million to Columbia University, $409 million to Harvard, $508 million to USC, which just canceled their graduation over fears of violence and protest, $73 million to George Washington University just down the street. We will be increasing our oversight of institutions that have received public funding and cracking down on those who are in violation of the Civil Rights Act. I'll leave you all with this. Imagine being a Jewish American, knowing that part of your hard-earned paycheck is going to fund an anti-Semitic professor's research while they threaten students and actively indoctrinate and radicalize the next generation. Pleased to yield now to the chairman, the great chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Jim Jordan.
Earlier today, the Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee sent 2 letters, one to Secretary Blinken, one to Secretary Mayorkas, asking 3 fundamental questions. Questions we as Republicans in the Congress want to know, and maybe more importantly, questions I think the American people want to have the answers to. First, how many students on a visa have engaged in the radical activity we've seen now day after day on college campuses? How many have engaged in this activity, endorsing or espousing terrorist activity on a college campus? Question 2, if you know that number, have you, the State Department, have you asked the State Department to revoke the visas, to revoke their visas? And then third, and maybe most importantly to Secretary Mayorkas, if you've done that, if you know that answer, have you started removal proceedings? Those are the questions that are in front of the Judiciary Committee that we want the answers to. Remember, on September 30th, 2021, Secretary Mayorkas issued his guidelines for immigration enforcement. And he said in there that national security threats are a reason, of course, to remove people from this country. So the fundamental question, the overriding question is real simple. Are individuals advocating for the destruction of our dearest and closest ally, the state of Israel, and engaged in this anti-Semitic behavior, is that a national security threat? We think it is, and we think the American people deserve the answers to those 3 fundamental questions. I now yield to the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Chairman Smith.
Let's start out with just saying these college and universities enjoy generous benefits under the U.S. tax code. They have a responsibility to the American taxpayer to ensure that they are fulfilling their educational requirements as tax-exempt organizations, as well as protecting students from intimidation, harassment, and violence. Sadly, too many colleges and universities have failed to hold up their end of the bargain.
That's the truth.
They have failed the test. They have allowed anti-Semitism to flourish on their campuses. Their inaction has emboldened the mobs who threaten Jewish students. At the Ways and Means Committee, we have been investigating the issue for months. In a hearing last November, we examined the nexus between anti-Semitism, tax-exempt universities, and terror financing networks. During that hearing, we heard vivid testimony from a Jewish student from Cornell about how she feared for her life amid the death threats being made to Jewish students on the campus while the university leadership was telling folks they shouldn't be worried. We've sent letters to university leaders demanding information on what disciplinary action, if any, that they have taken against those whose anti-Semitic activity violates campus policy. We've called on them to disclose any donations or funding they have received from foreign governments as well. Our investigation has already produced more than 1,500 pages of documents that we are now actively reviewing. We will not stop until we get answers, until Jewish students can feel safe, and until these universities are held accountable. I'm pleased to introduce my good friend, Chairman Jamie Comer.
The failure of Columbia University to address the pro-Hamas mob is an appalling lack of leadership. Now we are witnessing copycat anti-Israel protests pop up at universities across the country. These radical protests threatening violence against Jews are anything but organic. It appears global elites are funding these hateful protests and pop-up tent cities. These are the same groups that fund other radical agendas, including diminishing America's energy production and pushing soft on crime policies that harm the American people. The House Oversight Committee will follow the money trail, expose it to the American people, and seek to hold bad actors funding hate accountable. I want to thank Speaker Johnson and House leadership for coordinating this, and the House Oversight Committee looks forward to working with other committees to investigate this serious problem. I yield back to Speaker Johnson.
So you've just heard from the chairs of a number of the most powerful committees on Capitol Hill. You had oversight. You heard from the chair of Judiciary, Science, Space, and Technology, the House Education Workforce Committee, Ways and Means. There's more. And you'll hear the leadership team deeply involved in all this as well. We got to get down to the bottom of it. We have to root it out. Congress has two really important responsibilities that will be fulfilled in this exercise. One is oversight, and that's a job that we have, and also, of course, the use of the power of the purse. We need accountability for those who cannot maintain order, will not protect innocent students on their campus, and will not get on top of this situation. So with that, I'll take a few questions. Yep.
You took the unusual.
Guys, this is something that has been escalating every single day, from taking over a building to really threatening and stabbing. And there's a lot of issues going on that has caused our House Speaker to come out along with his chairman and just really kind of discuss these are things that we're going to have to do, take the next initiative steps, and bring order back to these campuses. Again, can you imagine being on campus, having to see all this crazy stuff? You know, I for one understand that when you have to pay for school and you don't get that college scholarship and you don't get that free ride, you think twice about taking a chance on getting suspended, losing money. But there's a lot of planned, pre-planned protest things that these guys are coming out of state, and they're really setting things up. They're getting people riled up. They're really building this up, and it's terrible. If anybody says death to America, they should be just, honestly, they should be kicked out of the country. No one should ever down or put our country at a place where it says death to America. If you don't like it here, you need to go. And I wish they would take all these people and just send them over to Palestine or Hamas and let them live there and do whatever they want to do there. Let them be crazy, because this is very un-American and this just isn't right. Guys, thank you so much for being a great audience. You love supporting me in the world. Thank you so much for all that you guys do. Don't forget to hit that like button, like and subscribe. Guys, you are great. Hope you have a wonderful night, and we'll see you in the next one.